No.
Okay, it says we're live. So, hello everybody. Welcome to Antagonists Anonymous, which has not broadcast for like 2 months. Sorry. This is supposed to be a weekly thing, and that hasn't really worked. I do apologize if I'm quiet today. I'm in a library because my internet is not functional at the moment. So you might hear some elevator dings and other odd noises. So sorry about that. But for those of you who don't know, my name is Brittany. I'm currently working on a science fiction novel for NaNoWriMo. My manuscript is almost done, so that's nice. And yeah, that's about it. And we have a co-host today, so let me switch cameras here. Boop. There you go. Say hi.
Hi. For those of you that don't know, I'm Kirsty, and I'm the other half of Antagonists Anonymous today. And I write fantasy, and I dabble in historical fiction and a little bit of science fiction as well.
Yay. Okay, so today, since Antagonist Anonymous is just getting back into the swing of things and getting going, I asked you guys to post questions using the hashtag AskAntagonists. And we did only have one question. Well, it's like a two-part question submitted, which is okay. I pulled a couple of questions from Nano Daily that you guys have asked before. And if we run out of questions, we will just make some up because we're really good at that. But
Yeah.
if you do think of a question, there is a chat box. I'm pretty sure it's on this side for you guys. Maybe it's on this side. There's a chat box somewhere. And you can submit questions while you're watching, and we'll keep an eye on that as well. So you don't have to go back to Twitter and use the tag if you don't want to. But yeah, that's about it. So let's get started. Okay, I'm gonna do these silly questions first because these ones always amuse me. We've talked about a couple of them already, but that's all right. Um, so the first question is tea or coffee? What do you think?
Coffee. I do like tea, but when I'm writing, it has to be coffee.
That's fair. That's fair. I actually don't drink either one. I really enjoy soda. I know. I enjoy soda, which is like way more sugar and way worse for me, and I'm trying to give it up and switch to water. But coffee, like, I love the smell of coffee, but the taste of it is just not my thing. But I've had coffee drinkers tell me, you just haven't found the right combination. And I was like, maybe, that's fair. I've only tried a couple, but for now, no thank you. Next question, milk or dark chocolate?
Oh, dark chocolate. Gotta go with the dark chocolate.
I gotta go with dark too, although there is a special place in my heart for white chocolate,
Oh, yeah.
especially if it's in pumpkin cookies. Oh, which brings me to my next question, cookies, yay or nay?
Oh, cookies. Absolutely. It's been a bit sad though since I've had to go off of gluten for my asthma. So cookies they don't happen as much as they used to.
Yes, and poor Kirsty is a stress baker. So if you ever bake
Yes.
cookies, just stress her out really bad and give her the ingredients, and she'll probably make them for
Yeah.
you.
And give me an address to send them to. I'll gladly do it.
Okay, I obviously love cookies, so yeah. I find it funny that these are all food questions. But while writing, do you prefer music or silence? Now, we did talk about this last night in Nano
Mhm.
Daily. And I did say then that I cannot write in silence. It bothers me to no end. If I'm alone, I listen to music all the time. I have several different writing playlists. I have them separated by like just a general writing playlist. I have mood ones, like if I need to be angry, I have rage music and things like that.
Of
Um,
course.
right? But if I'm around people, then I don't bother listening to music. I just listen to them instead. And a lot of people think that's distracting, but for some reason, I actually tend to write more when I'm around other people than I do when I'm alone. So,
Yeah, I agree. I actually do something similar if I'm out at a coffee shop. I rarely put music on. I just listen to the ambient noise. I sort of just need white noise to drown out extraneous thoughts. And that really does help. Can't be a movie playing in the background or anything like that, but coffee shop background noise or music. And I do have many playlists. I have playlists for each of my main characters. So each of my narrative characters has their own playlist that's sort of their theme songs for different sorts of emotional states that they get into throughout the course of the story. So,
Awesome. Okay. How do you stick to a deadline? Now, for me, because I am an obsessive plotter, sticking to a deadline is pretty easy. If anything, I tend to meet deadlines before they would kill me.
yeah.
Calling it a deadline. But I would say if I wasn't somebody who like already knew where the story was going, like assuming I was a pantser or something, dirty heathens. But if I was, um, my theory on the best way to meet a deadline is the same way I would meet a goal, which is take your deadline, say your deadline's 10 days away, and then
Mm-hmm.
divide whatever your goal is by 10 and do that much every day, and you're there for word count goals or whatever. But that's my theory. I don't know what yours is.
Um, with deadlines, I tend to need them. Um, Mostly that's because if I don't have them, I'll just kind of either procrastinate until the end of time, or I will keep writing until I have 400,000 words, and that's really not acceptable for a first book. Um, so I'll either spin very verbose and write way too much, or I'll never reach the end. Because I will just procrastinate it away. So a deadline really does help me. Now, I have learned that sometimes I need to be flexible with my deadlines because, like with the book I'm currently revising, I had to push my deadline back 3 months, I think, 3 or 4 months, because I hit a snag where I realized a whole section of the book had to be completely rewritten. So, like the last third of the book. And with that, rather than beating myself up over I can't make my deadline, I said, well, this change in deadline is actually going to help in the long run because it'll make the book better. So with deadlines, I guess my feeling is they help. They can be really, really useful, but do not get into the habit of not making your deadline because of problems happening and beating yourself up over not meeting your deadline. Give yourself the credit for actually coming close and move it if you absolutely need to. But make sure you're making forward progress, I guess would be my biggest suggestion with deadlines. And set small goals. Break them up into smaller goals. So with my writing, I'm not a pantser or a plotter. I'm a hybrid. So with my writing, I sort of set goals for when I want to get to the major events that I have plotted. And that kind of keeps the pantser side of me in track so that I have like 3 months out, I'll have reached this point in the story. And before that, I set sort of character arc goals or plot goals that I kind of want the characters to be moving in this direction. So I break it up into smaller sections. What sort of emotional developments do I want the character to have? And that can be weekly or it can be monthly. But those smaller goals make that giant goal at the end of like a year so much more manageable and less scary. So with deadlines, I'd say break them up into smaller deadlines that are manageable for you. Sorry, that was a bit rambly, but
No, that's fine. If I disappear in
mm-hmm.
13 minutes, it's because my computer just informed me that it's going to automatically update. And I just went and changed the settings so that it won't. But I don't know if since I changed the setting after it said it's going to, if it still will. So if I disappear, I'm so
It's
sorry.
not.
And I will come back. Hopefully, my disappearing won't make Kirsty disappear as well, but it might because I'm hosting. So if we vanish, I'm sorry. Also, I have just went and looked at the chat, and anyone who doesn't like cookies is un-American. I completely agree. Um,
I love you guys.
and also one says, my issue with Nano I'm 25,000 words in, and I feel like I'm two-thirds of the way through my story, so I have to go back and add more to the beginning to pad it out, or I'll have a novella. I am having the same problem. What happened for my nano project is I decided to continue a book I had previously started because I really wanted to finish it and I wanted it to be my first published work, or major published work, I should say. So when I started, it already had, I don't know, I think 7 or 8 thousand words. Not a lot. I mean, there wasn't much there, but I am now hovering just under 40,000 for total word count for the project, and I've got nothing. I've already written every chapter that I planned out. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but what I realized was when I looked back, some of my chapters have like 3 or 4 thousand words, which is where it should be, considering I planned for 20 chapters plus an epilogue and a prologue, and I was aiming for about 80,000 words because it's a science fiction novel and that's the average.
Yeah.
Um, but then I had some chapters that are only like 600 words. And one of the chapters is purposely short because there's like a major event that doesn't really need a lot of detail in it, but the rest of them, it was just, I was lazy. So I've actually started doing the same thing. I'm going back, I'm adding scenes. In some chapters, I'm adding scenes that don't really go with what I've already written, but it's still boosting my word count, and it's still things that might make it into the final draft. I just might have to arrange some things. So don't hesitate to do that. You know, if you think of a scene that's like, oh, well, this doesn't fit, just add it on somewhere. Put asterisks around it or something if you need to keep it separate, like if you're not using a writing program with tabs, and just add it in there. It boosts your word count, and it might be stuff that you decide to keep later. I mean, you never know what's going to be an awesome idea until your first draft, which is word vomit, is done. So
Yes.
just toss it in there.
Yeah. I completely agree about first drafts being nothing but word vomit. They are tell yourself the story and don't care how it comes out. Don't even worry about the presentation when you draft something for the first time because that's not going to be the final version. And if it is, you're some kind of miracle because there's really no other explanation if your first draft can be your final draft. That's amazing. Um, with me, I write my first draft to an average about like 60,000 words. 65,000 is my first draft. For some background, I write fantasy primarily. So we tend to skew even longer than science fiction. Between 90 and 110,000 is what they recommend for your first published fantasy novel. Um, so my goal for the one I was writing that got to 65 was to make 90. And what I ended up doing was, okay, first draft, 65,000 words. What do I do? Because clearly this is not enough. Well, I went back and read it and realized what I had done was a lot of the time I'd skipped over setting details, which we all know in fantasy, setting is like its own character. So that's really crucial to add in. Another thing I'd done was I hadn't been deep enough in POV some of the times. Sometimes my point of view was way too pulled back. And I ended up just sort of telling how the scene was going. I was just telling the story. I wasn't actually showing you the story. And so what I did was I deepened POV on a lot of characters and gave the scenes more from their perspective. So I started writing in a close third so that it was like I was looking over their shoulder and occasionally being able to get inside their head and hear their thoughts. And that added a lot of words and a lot of detail and a lot of emotional impact to the story. And now, I don't know, it's been six months into revisions, I guess. And I'm at 92,000 words and growing because I ended up having to rewrite the last third of the book because the book was too slow the way I'd written the first draft. That revision process, there's nothing you can't fix with revision. I firmly believe that revision can fix any ill of a first draft. And if you're thinking you're going to end up too short, fall short of your goal, go back, read it, and revise. Take a day to read it, and then add to it, rewrite. If you're a plotter, plot some new scenes. that add to your book. If you're a pantser, go back to a scene that you really love but don't feel that you fleshed out enough and see where it goes.
Hmm.
That's my best advice for if you're falling short of your goals.
And there's somebody in the chat right now that says they're in a Skype chat with some people who are saying that they need their first draft perfect. And my recommendation to you, to when talking to them, is just point out the fact that if your first draft needs to be perfect, you're never going to get it done.
Yeah.
Because a first draft is never perfect,
Mm-hmm.
ever. And a final draft is also never perfect. There are books, I mean, I'm in a library, so I can walk about 10 feet, pick up a book, and I guarantee one out of every four will
Mm-hmm.
have some sort of spelling mistake, grammatical mistake, maybe a
Yes.
sentence is missing, maybe there's a plot hole. I mean, it might not be a gaping plot hole, but there might just be questions that are like, this was never addressed. Now, of course, if you have quality beta readers and editors and things like that, the chances of having those types of issues go down. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but there is not a single writer out there. I mean, I don't care if you're talking to J.K. Rowling or Stephen King or Susie down the street who self published erotica. There's not a
Mm-hmm.
single writer who will sit there and tell you that out of all the books they've published, there isn't a mistake in any of them. Because the problem is when you're writing a book, you get better as you write, like no matter how good you already are. So
Yes.
the beginning of the book is probably going to be dumpster fire compared to the end of the book, which is why you go back and revise and you try to make it less of a dumpster fire. But the more you
Yes.
revise, the better you get. So every single time that you go back and look at that draft, you're going to find more things wrong with it. But you need to know what the point is, where it's like, you know what? If I look at this anymore, I'm going to hang myself. And that's when you look for an agent. So,
Or hire an editor.
editor. Yes. So just, tell them it's never going to be perfect. And if
Mm-hmm.
they don't, I don't know how to phrase this, but like, because I know I'm an obsessive plotter, but if you don't just spew random crap in there, you never know what could happen. I mean, some stuff that I have now, I did not expect to be in there when I started. Like, for example, just in my attempt to win a word war, because I'm very competitive, at a write in the other day, I wrote a scene and then realized after that I had just spent 2,000 words on a scene that I can't put in my book
Yep.
because the scene is with a character who is going to be dead by the time the scene would take place. So instead, I'm going to use it in the sequel because this is book one of a trilogy as like a daydream instead, like wish it could happen, but he's dead, so it can't. So I will still use it. It's not 2,000 wasted words, it's just 2,000 misplaced words.
Mm-hmm.
And stuff like that happens. So there are a lot of writers out there too who have made videos and webcasts and things talking about first drafts, and every single one of them says it's garbage. So if you're trying to make it perfect, I'm sorry, but you're probably never going to be published.
Mm-hmm.
That's just how it goes. Okay, you
We
talk for a
agree.
minute while I go hunt down another question.
Yeah. I totally agree with everything you just said. I started off in a similar place to what the people in that Skype chat are going through. When I was about 14, 15 years old, I started seriously writing, and I thought my first draft was the book, and it had to be perfect. So I would get about 4 chapters in, and then I would get stuck in a loop of revisions because it wasn't as good as I wanted it to be. It wasn't as good as I wanted it to be. And I'd just go over and over and over, and I would never get anywhere. And so what I ended up realizing was if I was going to get through the book, I had to just write the book because otherwise it would never get finished. And the funniest thing was the first one I wrote was total crap. I mean, it was essentially a knockoff of Tolkien and Tamara Pierce. They were my absolute favorite authors at the time, and I sort of smushed the two of them together in one story, and that was my first draft. Looking back on it, it's hilarious to read. Um, but that book broke my it has to be perfect drafting mindset. And it wasn't until this year, or this past 2 years, that I've been living in Norway, that I realized how important revision was, and how important it was to give myself permission to get it wrong the first time. Because I freely admit I'm more than a little bit of a perfectionist when it comes to my writing. I stress the details, and the characters have to be developed just so, and the emotional impact has to be big enough that I cry at the right moments when I read it. And I absolutely have perfectionist tendencies when it comes to my writing. But these past 2 years taught me that it's so vitally important to give myself permission. And I have had to actually write this out on paper, and tell it to myself over and over again. It's okay to write the first draft wrong. It is okay to have a bad first draft. And I've had to tell myself that over and over and over and over again, until finally it sunk into my thick skull that it's okay to be bad when I write my first draft. And now I'm deep in the revision process of the book I just drafted, and the revision process is where I let my perfectionism come out, because that's where I take what I like to picture as the raw block of marble and turn it into a statue. I get to take that raw material of the draft and shape that into the image in my head. That's where I can let the perfectionism thrive, because then I can tweak it and make all those points important and hit all the right emotional levels and draw out the foreshadowing and the backstory and the world building, and really bring those elements to the front. Um, but if I try to do that in the first draft, I never actually tell the story. Um, so you have to tell the story first and let yourself do it poorly, and then fix it in the revision process, turn it into a statue. So the way I like to envision the process is the first draft is going to the quarry and cutting a block of marble. The revision process is actually making the statue. And you might have to do revision several times to get it right. Just saying, like that might take 2, 3, 4 revisions. I mean, if you, I don't know what all of you write. Two examples that I go to all the time are Susan Dennard in YA. She writes extensively on her website about her writing process, and she talks about revision and how many revisions she goes through and how stressful that process is for her, because she's also a perfectionist. And of course, Brittany, you can make fun of me for this. Go see Brandon Sanderson's number of drafts that he does. Seriously, the guy writes 400,000 word fantasies and rewrites them like 4 or 5 times before they get published. And he's a multi-million-dollar author. So it's okay to get it wrong. That's my motto.
Oh my word. Okay, so I'm glad I was muted because I just started giggling like a maniac.
Yes,
Um,
yes,
for
I
those
know.
of you who don't know, she is an obsessive Brandon Sanderson fangirl, and it's so hilarious to me because whenever anybody asks for writing advice, like that's her go-to. Like, you should listen to Brandon Sanderson. You should read Brandon Sanderson. He is a god among men, and
I write fantasy. And he's an amazing epic fantasy writer. If Tolkien had writing advice, I'd be sending you to him.
I'm not saying you're wrong. It's just funny to me that you are
I
just
know.
like out there holding a sign. We love you, Brandon. Okay, so anyway, sorry, it's just so funny to me. Okay,
If you can't
so
see, I'm blushing right now. Thank you, Brittany.
you're welcome. Okay, we have another question. How do you find good and reliable beta readers, and when in your process should you send your work to them? Now, I have a couple beta readers already. But I think it really depends on who you ask. depending on when you should send your work to them, because most writers say don't bother sending your work to beta readers until you have a finished manuscript, which is solid advice. The only reason that I already have a couple is because I wanted to make sure that my first couple of chapters made sense to people that were not me. I really wanted an outside opinion before I finished my manuscript so that if there were any like glaring mistakes, I could go back and change the angle that the story was going in already. So that's why I already got a couple. And they're people that I already knew really well and didn't mind the fact that they were reading an incomplete story. Um, but for the most part, I would say wait until you have a finished manuscript. But I think you should find them ahead of time. You know, if you're almost done and you're ready, just say, hey, looking for beta readers. For those of you that don't know, beta readers are people who read your story before it's released. They're people that read it while you're in the editing phase. They suggest changes, they point out plot holes, they ask questions that your, sorry, that was my phone, that your readers once you are published, questions that they'd be like, well, why is this way? Why isn't this here? Why does this character mysteriously vanish after page 34? Like, they point out mistakes that sometimes, as a reader, no matter how many times you read your story, you miss it. That's what they're for. And as for how to find them, post on Twitter. Say, hey, I'm looking for beta readers because the best beta readers are people who read, and I can guarantee that every single one of you has a Twitter follower list full of people who read. Um, as for who you want for beta readers, try to get a variety, but also try to get people who read what you're going for. If you're publishing a young adult fantasy novel, you probably don't want a bunch of 70-year-old ladies who only read like crime mysteries or whatever. I mean, yeah, they might enjoy it, but is their opinion really of value to you? Maybe. Probably not. If you're looking for more information on beta readers, though, I would recommend looking up Jenna Moresi. She's a writer and she makes a lot of videos on YouTube as well, and she's hilarious and awesome. And she does have a video about beta readers, and that's really helpful if you've never gotten any on your own. Did you have anything that you wanted to add, dear, with the muted microphone? Are you talking to your boyfriend? You are, aren't you?
No, no, I was pouring a glass of water, so I didn't want you guys hearing the splashing glass in the background here. No, I really don't because I haven't yet gotten to the beta reader stage. So that's a part of the process that's actually still quite intimidating to me because I haven't yet gotten there. And so I'm still kind of in process on that and mostly just listening a lot. And I joined a, what's it called? Blah. An online writers conference run by an agent, Jessica Sinsheimer, on Twitter. And she started a whole online writing conference that she's gotten a whole bunch of people in the industry to do with her. And they've done videos and everything. And one of their things is on, for the adult conference at the end of the month, it's on beta reading and how important that process is. And she also does, I think they also discuss sensitivity readers, which is similar but different. They're looking at different things in your book. But I really don't have much to add on this topic because I haven't gotten there yet. Other than just to reiterate what Brittany said about make sure that the people you have reading your book are relevant to the demographic that you are targeting, because that's really important to see if it resonates or if it feels like you're talking down to them or like your character isn't mature enough for the age you're writing in. It's really helpful to get into those details with your beta readers, as far as I understand it. That's what I would be looking for when I go for beta readers. So that's my addition. We do have a question on Twitter that I saw.
Yeah, I saw that too, and it made me laugh a lot. Do you want to read it?
Sure. So everybody agrees to put that you have to put your protagonist through the worst possible things. How much is too much, if such a thing exists?
Okay, so For those of you who don't know me and haven't been following me for a long time, I'm gonna reveal a little spoiler to you, and that is killing characters is my favorite, and torturing them is like my lifeblood. And if somebody is going through a rough time, it's the best thing ever. So, is this inhumane? Maybe, but they're fictional, so I can't get arrested. So there's that. But to me, there's no such thing as pushing a protagonist too far. Um, if you have a protagonist that has like some really tragic backstory, which seems to be a typical thing for a protagonist, and then like you're putting them through all sorts of bad things and they have a mental breakdown and it's just terrible. Yeah, that's kind of mean. But sometimes it's also necessary for character development. Characters, people change depending on what happens to them. So if you have a person that, say, they were brought up in like a perfectly normal home and they've never experienced anything too crazy, very middle class, and then all of a sudden they're in the middle of the Pacific Ocean on a ship alone, and probably going to die, and then the ship starts sinking. They're probably not going to know what to do. They're probably going to freak out, have to get a little creative, or die. And those are things that would never typically happen to them if you didn't feel like torturing them on that particular day. So I think it helps you to really see what a character is made of when you decide to do horrible, horrible things to them. And it's also really therapeutic if there's somebody that you don't like and you write them into your book and then they die. So just throw that out. And yeah, so for me, there isn't really, I mean, unless obviously you have like a whole book which is just you torturing somebody for fun. Um, that's probably a little excessive, but as long as you have an actual plot and reason that you're doing all these terrible things, then I say go for it. Bring on the chainsaws. Like, let's get this party started. And yeah, that's my opinion. What's yours?
Um, well, yeah, if it's in service to the plot and or character development, I say it's a go. Um, I'm I don't really torture characters just for the sake of torturing them. Um, so I have lines on that. I I do try to use bad things happening to the character in a way that makes sense. So I guess my thought on the whole worst things happening to show you who the character really is only do that if it's relevant to your plot or if it's a logical thing that might happen. So for instance, if you're trying to show a character in who might be new to a big city and they're scared of all the boogeymen in the big city and whatever, because they're from a tiny town or something like that. And I've been there, big city, small town girl, doesn't always work out so well. But if you wanted to throw them into a worst possible scenario and see how they do, you could have one of their worst fears about the city come through. So just to continue with the city analogy, you could have this, small town girl going through the city, big eyes, totally nervous, and somebody steals her purse. Great. That's just great. Now she has no wallet, she has no keys, she has no directions, her phone was in there. What's she going to do? How does she solve that situation? You see whether she freaks out and panics, or you see if she can control herself and handle it with a level-headed calm. If it's relevant to the story, if it makes sense in the environment you're in, go for it. If it's going to push you towards your next plot point. If it's just for the sake of gratuitous torture of character because you want to, I'm not the kind of person that would recommend that. For instance, in my book, I do have pretty gratuitous torture scenes at one point because it's a medieval fantasy, and torture is, hey, something that happened, not great, but it happened, and so the bad guy does torture the male main character. And the interesting thing about it is it's not torture for torture's sake. These two have a really nasty history together. And So there's a real intense backstory being played out between these two that the reader is slowly learning about through these awful things that the antagonist does to the main character. And that's very relevant for both of their character developments and for getting inside both of their heads and understanding their motives. So in that case, I say push the envelope with the torture and push the envelope with how much you put them through, because it's revealing something about them, and it's relevant to the story that I'm telling. But if it isn't relevant or it isn't actually revealing information, maybe see if you can write it a different way. But that's my thoughts on pushing your protagonist through at the absolute worst. Anything else?
No, we are actually out of questions. So we do still have a few people watching. So if you have any questions about writing or about anything, because we did have answer a lot of food questions too. So
Yes.
it's an ask us anything episode, which means anything goes. So also, I'm just realizing the lighting in here is really quite terrible. I look yellow.
Well, I have a halo because of the way this light is, so
That's okay.
I've been trying to adjust it, but I keep ending up with a halo, so you know.
You're just better than we are. That's all. Okay.
We'll go with that.
Oh, hold on. We've got another Twitter question. Let me get it.
The Twitter. Oh.
What did you find it before I did?
Uh-huh. It's a good one.
Okay, bad guy versus bad ideas. Do ideas as antagonists always need a face or person to blame for these ideas? Little.
Ideologies?
Thank you. Yeah, you go first.
Oh. This is kind of near and dear to my heart because I love this idea as an antagonist process, because I think that goes very well with dealing with a lot of social issues. Like social ideas, political ideas as the antagonist to your character can be really powerful. Now, sometimes those ideas take on a face in the form of people that espouse the idea, but they don't always have to. Because it could be in a situation where you have a character that might be under, let me think of an example. Oh gosh, my brain's blanking, of course, on fiction I can use in this. All right, simple one. If you take, for instance, Ayn Rand's Anthem, which is very short book. But if you look at that book and you say, who was the antagonist in that story? The antagonist was actually quite faceless. The antagonist was the ideas that kept everyone stuck inside that story. There was no set antagonist. It was just the idea that everyone had to do exactly as they were told. And even the people who the main character ended up confronting when he went outside of the rules of the society were merely doing as they were told by people higher than them. They didn't even really represent the full idea of the society, which was really interesting to me to look at this book and say, but there was no person antagonist. This was merely a collection of ideas. And that made that whole story very interesting to me, because it was one of the stories that I read that had never given face to one person behind it all. It was an ideology that was behind it all. And nobody seemed to truly understand why they thought or wanted these ideas. They just knew they were right, and they accepted them blindly. I really like the idea of ideology as the antagonist and never giving it one true face, but making it seen through its effect on everyone else in a society or through people you know, because I think it's a great way to examine prejudice and hatred, and it gives you a way to say, well, maybe this thing, this way of thinking, is truly the enemy, and these people aren't actually the enemy. They've just been influenced by this idea. And if you can break through to what's beyond to them as individuals um, rather than focusing on attacking them as being the root of the evil, but you focus on the ideas that have made them feel that way, then you have a much more interesting story where you're focusing on the evil of that idea rather than the evil of the individuals involved that might have been duped or, in the case of Captain America's Bucky, brainwashed into it. You can use all kinds of examples, but it makes for a much more difficult story to tell, and I think it puts it on a bit more of a cerebral level. So you're dealing a little bit with literary fiction if you go the route of a faceless ideology as opposed to a single antagonist. I think that takes it a little more literary, which can be really fun to do in fiction. There are some great fantasy writers that have headed the literary road and made literary fantasy, which is remarkable to read. So that's sort of my thoughts on that. I think it can be a great and very valid outlet. So I don't think that they always need a face. I think ideologies can serve as the bad guy.
I agree. The book that I'm writing now is actually like that. It's kind of like the government. There aren't really specific people, and the government only is fucking with people because of this thing that happened and nobody knows why, and people assume it's a spiritual thing, and because of it there isn't really a church system like we have now. It's hard to explain, but it's basically the government runs the world and it's kind of a central government, and there aren't any specific people that are to blame. It's kind of everybody. So I mean, there are a couple specific people that you're like, that is a bad person, and they end up dying and, getting what's coming to them. But overall, there isn't like a specific person that's like Ursula or something. Now, I have a soft spot for villains. I love a well written villain. Villains are my favorite. I prefer antagonists over protagonists any day of the week. Ursula is my favorite. That's why she's my go to mention. But um, any villain is awesome, as long as they're well written. So whether it's an idea or a government or a single person or a group of people, as long as it's well written, well thought out, well planned, it can come off really well. I mean, they've all been well done before and they can all be well done again. So if you have an idea instead of a person, just make sure that it makes sense. So if you have like somebody who's, I don't know, I can't even think of what would be a really crappy idea as a villain. Like the idea that penguins are evil. I don't know, that doesn't, like, it just, it doesn't make sense. That would be a really crappy book and I wouldn't want to read it. Actually, I probably would want to read it, not gonna lie, but you get what I'm saying. So okay, we have a new question. Do you have specific times you need to write during, or else your writing won't get in that day? No. I am actually a full time writer right now. I also teach paint classes part time. I have one tonight. um, but when I was working full time, I basically wrote whenever I had a chance, or whenever I felt like it, to be more accurate. Some writers I know can only write during specific times. I'm not like that. I am not a morning person. I will say that much. No amount of writing is going to get done in the morning unless you mean the part of the morning that comes after midnight and before sleeping. But the part of the morning when most people are waking up is when I will throw things at you if you talk to me. And having children does not make that any better. Just because I'm awake does not mean I'm functioning. So, um, most of my writing is in the afternoon or evening, but that's just because I'm tired. But I can really write whenever. If I have a spare hour, especially during November because of Nano, if I have spare time, I'm using it to write. So, your turn.
Um, my thoughts on this are simply that I tend to write best at night. And the reason for that's really simple for me. It's because that's when I'm least distracted by everything else going on in my life. Um, I I'm an introvert, so stuff input all the time during the day, birds flying past the windows, people walking by, random noises in the house of other people or stuff happening. I get completely distracted and it's very hard to focus unless I can have my earbuds in with some music playing to drown it out. So I prefer to write at night when everyone else and everything else is pretty much asleep. And it's also really quiet. If you live in a city, which I hope not to be doing come the future too long, that would be really nice. You don't have as much car noises and ambient sounds like sirens and whatever. If you if you write at night, during the day it tends to be extremely loud um, and very distracting for me. So I prefer the nighttime because it's just not as much activity going on. And that allows me to relax and open up and focus and really dig deep. And I'm not as, um, for lack of a better word, I don't have as much emotional distance when I write at night because I'm kind of tired after the whole day has passed. So I don't have as many of my emotional boundaries up anymore. Those walls have sort of fallen. And so it's easier for me to get in touch with my emotional side. And it's also easier to cry at night because there's less people to see you do it while you're writing and think you're really strange. So writing at night for me just tends to work out a whole lot better. But it's not necessarily a question of my writing won't get done if I only write at night. It's more a question of whether or not I still have the brain power to write at the end of a day or at any point during the day, depending on how busy I am. It really depends on how tired I am, whether my writing happens. Because if I'm tired, or particularly if I've been socializing a lot during a day, I rarely get any writing done on a day when I've had to socialize a lot. Um, so if I've been out and talking to people or I've had visitors over, I'm going to need at least a nap if I'm going to write. If not, the writing won't happen. Or if it does, it'll be really awful. So to that question, I would say you have to sort of know yourself and know what you need to be able to write, and then work that in to your schedule. Make sure that you make that time for yourself because let's face it, we don't write because it's our jobs. We write because we love it. And if you love something, you should absolutely make time for it. Give yourself that reward. Don't withhold it because that makes you a happier person, I think. But that's all I have to say on it. Do we have any more questions, Brittany?
We don't have any more questions. So, since we only have like 10 minutes left, I am looking in the old ask tag that we used the last
Mm-hmm.
time that we had an AMA video, and I'm just going to choose random questions. So,
Okay. We did just get one on Twitter too, 35 seconds ago.
whoops. Okay.
It says for new authors, should they try to publish traditionally or independently? Pros, cons of both.
Oh, God. Okay. So, this topic is a headache because it really deserves like a full webcast devoted
Yeah,
to talking about this topic.
I
And
agree.
that is one that is planned. That is one that is going to be happening.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I am going the hybrid route. I plan on being traditionally published while retaining my electronic rights, which means the ebooks would be published on my own.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm doing that because financially it makes more sense. You make more money, and I may not be in the writing business because I want to become a millionaire, but I would still like for my hobby to make me some money.
Yeah.
So that's the route that I'm going. I know a lot of people who have gone straight indie route, which sometimes that can make you a lot of money too, and people become really famous that way. But I've always wanted to be traditionally published. Like that's been my thing since I was like 5. So
Mm-hmm.
that's why I'm going a hybrid route. I don't know if you have anything to add.
Not really. I would say the simple difference between indie and traditional publishing is in indie, you have to sort of be the kind of person that's either willing to pay other people to do a lot of things for you or is capable of doing a lot of things yourself. So in indie, particularly if you go with, say, Amazon publishing that way, if you aren't going to a small publishing house, if you're going with an independent publisher completely, so Amazon or I guess Nook still and maybe Kobo, the one thing you really want to think about is, do you have resources and or ability to do covers? Do you have the money to have someone edit your book if you want to do that? If you want to have them edit. Those are the kinds of things you have to think about. If you're being traditionally published, all of that stuff is sort of what the publisher does for you. And then they get their cut from from all of that stuff that they do for you without sort of, it's part of their job description. That's why they're there, is to do all the things that sometimes we aren't talented and or skilled in. So if you are comfortable with either making your own cover or knowing someone or buying covers from people who independently do that, and there are a wealth of people that do make covers for independently published books professionally, and there are a ton of people out there who are editors that do freelance editing. There's a ton of options out there for independently published, but I would say it takes a little more work on your end, and like to be independently published, but it also gives you a lot more control over your final product. In traditional publishing, they tend to do a lot of that without really your approval on covers, or they might demand certain edits that you don't want, but once it's gone to the publishing house from you and your editor, they've already purchased your book, so you sort of have to, work with them on those changes they want. So in indie, you have a lot more control, but you also have a lot more work on your plate. And in traditional, you lose some of your control, but you get a lot of that extra work done for you.
Right.
So those are really the pros and cons of it. But I'm hoping to go traditional. However, I do have a lot of people that I'm friends with that have gone independent and have done very well. And I know a thriller writer that I really admire him. He's amazing. And he writes incredibly good thrillers. And he's doing very well in that. He's made like top 20 in Amazon's list a couple times, and he's got books on audible.com as well. And it's nice to see. So his suggestion is actually that you query the traditional industry. I believe it was him that said it. I might be wrong. One independent person I know queries the publishing industry, and if they don't get a bite after like 100 queries or something, then they independently publish and move on to their next book. But they're very careful to make sure that book is at a high level before they publish it, so that they're not publishing substandard or subpar work just to have it published. They make sure that it's a professional work and not just sort of a vanity piece that they want to see their name on a book cover. So that's sort of thoughts on traditional and indie.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, a lot of people go indie route because they want to publish quickly. And to be fair, traditional takes a lot of time.
Yes, it does.
People who publish indie, not all of them. I'm just saying, if you go on Amazon right now, there's a lot of crap. And I think that's why indie publishing has such a bad reputation. It is slowly getting to be a better reputation, but it's because anybody can publish anything. And let's be honest, most of the stuff that's on Amazon is garbage. No offense to the writers, just they didn't take the time.
Yeah.
Which is
It takes time
you
to
know,
develop
your
skills.
own, but if you're not going to even bother to edit or whatever, like I said, this is something that should really be its own webcast. So we will step away, but we will come back to this at some point.
Yeah, there's a lot of nuance to this issue. I mean, indie versus I don't really feel like it's an indie versus traditional. It's more of like there's two different roads you can take to get to the same destination, and it depends sort of on whether you want to off-road it or go the highway route. So there's a lot of good and bad that goes with both. But to new writers, I would say pick what works best for you. What are you most comfortable with, and pursue that route, because that's ultimately, it has to be comfortable for you as the author.
Mm-hmm. All right, we actually have another question.
Ooh.
I see the hashtag own voices a lot, and I don't know if my current story would be considered own voices, as my main character is a member of a marginalized group, but not me. What makes an own story, own voices story valid? I'm sorry, I can't talk. From what I know, the own voices tag is for writers who
Yeah.
are people of color or otherwise marginalized. I do know that they are seeking diverse stories basically everywhere right now. So it's awesome that your character is, but I'm pretty sure the tag
Mm-hmm.
is for writers
Yeah.
who are in that category. But there are a lot of tags out there for stories that are just about
If you,
um,
I'm
characters
pretty,
that aren't typical.
yeah, I'm pretty sure if you search, what is it, hashtag diverse books or
Yeah,
div
I think
pit.
something
I
like
think div pit is another one, and that's for diverse books pitching.
that. Mhm.
Um, Own voices is, I do believe that you're right on that. I think own voices is for authors writing about their own marginalized or otherwise non-white group. Um, and I think that I do believe that's correct on the own voices hashtag. But uh, hashtag div pit is the diverse pit one, and I think if you search hashtag diverse books, I think that also comes up with a lot of it. And I would say search the manuscript wishlist website for diverse books, because a lot of if you're going traditional, there's a lot of agents and editors on there that are looking for diverse books. So if you're looking to find someone for that book, that would be a great place to start, because those the listings there tend to be pretty extensive, um, and the editors and agents tend to be very specific about what they're looking for. Um, so you might find something that would help you with that there. Um, so that's, yeah.
Also, be very careful on Twitter. A lot of people who are new to Twitter and hashtags, sometimes they don't know this, but if you see a hashtag that ends in pit,
Yeah.
PIT, it means it's for pitching, which means you should not favorite it because
Yes.
people use Twitter to pitch their books to agents on certain days. There
Mhm.
are a whole bunch of pitching days for different genres. And how they do it is they will write a log line, which is just a line that summarizes their book. They'll tweet it out there with the appropriate tag on it. And any agent who favorites it is basically saying, I like this, send me a query. So if you favorite it, most people will look at your profile, realize you're not an agent, you made a mistake. But it does get a little frustrating if you're somebody who's like eagerly waiting for agents to favorite your stuff, and then one of your friends does.
Yeah.
It's like, damn it, why didn't you write the rules? So, just so that you know, pitching things, don't favor them. You can still comment on them, be like, wow, this is a great line, or wow, this sounds really interesting. I'd like to read it. Just don't favorite it. But I mean, if you see something you like, definitely comment or follow them, send them a DM, whatever. Be like, you're awesome. But don't favorite it. You have to be really careful with that.
Yes. Yes.
Um, so it's been an hour. We've hit an hour.
Wow.
Awesome. Okay. So these we do try to keep these to an hour, and since we don't have a huge flood of questions right now, I think it is safe to say that we can end. What do you think?
I think so. This has been a good chat too.
Hmm.
Great for our first time back in a while. Feels good.
Yeah, it has been a long time. So next Saturday, um, my co-host is leaving me because she's coming back to the States. She's in Norway right now and she's coming back next weekend, which is awesome, except it also sucks because I'm all alone and it's
Yeah.
sad. So if any of you would like to be on Antagonists Anonymous, let me know. I am more than happy to have different people on here. I love having people I don't know or people I don't know very well or people who've never been on here. Sometimes I think our most we had like four people. That was a
Yeah.
little confusing, but it was amazing because the
It was.
conversation that gets going is just It's hysterical and helpful at the same time. Um, so if you're interested, whether you're watching this now or you watch it the recorded version later, just let me know sometime before next Saturday. It is probably going to be around the same time, which is 11 o'clock Eastern time, because I don't think my internet will be functional by next weekend, which means I'm forced to oblige the library in their stupid hours. Um, but yeah, that's all I have to say. Thank you so much to everybody who came and submitted questions. This was great. And yep, that's all I have. What about you?
Same thing. Thank you to everyone who came and watched today and participated. That was really nice to actually have questions today. It's always fun when we can help people with their questions, and it helps us too. I think because sometimes you don't often think of some of these kinds of questions. They're not something you consider on a daily basis. So it helps you clarify your own thoughts on the issues. And we're all writers, so it's nice to discuss craft and skill build together. I think is it's the greatest thing ever. But yeah, so sorry I won't be here next week. I'll be flying into New York or at a hotel or something. I'm not quite sure where I'll be when this actually happens. I might even be en route to Pennsylvania at that point from New York City. So it'll be chaos for me. I'm sorry. Takes a lot of time and effort to move back from Norway to the U.S. But I will definitely be back the week after that if we schedule a chat for then. And I should be a lot more regular on here now that I'm no longer subject to the whims of whatever I'm doing in Norway at the time. So
Yes, and we do normally, this week was a little different, obviously, because we were just getting the weekend, but there is normally a poll
yes.
with four different options of the topic for the next webcast. So I will probably post that either today or tomorrow and leave it open for usually 3 or 4 days so that you guys can vote so that we know what we're talking about next week. So if you have suggestions of things you'd like other than indie versus traditional publishing, because that will happen, but I would like to have some guests. I have some people in mind, but I have to coordinate schedules with them. But anyway, if you have suggestions of topics that you would like to watch people talking for an hour about, let me know. And that's it. Bye.